We're about to dive into one of the most transformative and complex intellectual traditions in human history, the German school of philosophy. From Immanuel Kant's critique of reason to Hegel's dialectic, to the revolutionary work of the Frankfurt School, this tradition has shaped how we think about morality, freedom, and society. But why should you care about it? What does German philosophy offer to you today in your own life? Well, think about this. How often do you question the deeper meaning of the structures around you? Do you ever stop to consider if the systems of power we live under were designed for your benefit or for someone else's? The German school of philosophy wrestles with these very questions, and by understanding its timeline, you'll gain insights that can fundamentally shift your perspective on life. In the next 15 minutes, we're going to take you on a journey through the timeline of German philosophy, unlocking some of the most profound ideas ever developed. And by the end, you won't just be smarter, you'll be wiser.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
First, let's start with the Enlightenment. You've probably heard about how this era was all about reason and liberating the human mind from superstition and fear. But there's so much more to it than that. The Enlightenment wasn't just about discovering scientific facts or advancing technology. It was a philosophical revolution, a shift in how we saw the world and our place in it. And no one embodies this more than Immanuel Kant. Kant believed that our experience of reality was shaped by how our minds organize it. Sounds strange, right? But think about it. When you see a tree, your mind isn't just passively receiving that image. Your mind is actively constructing the concept of tree by applying categories like space, time, and causality. Kant asks us to go deeper. What if reality as it is, the thing in itself, is fundamentally unknowable? What if all we ever perceive is just a projection of our minds? That's pretty wild when you really think about it. What if everything you know is merely how your brain interprets it, and you'll never truly access what's out there? This is where Kant changed the game. He argued that while we rely on our senses, true knowledge also requires reason. And of course, Kant wasn't just concerned with metaphysics. He wanted to apply this insight to ethics. He asked, what is the basis of morality? What is the right thing to do? Kant proposed that moral laws should be universal. Ever heard of the golden rule, treat others as you'd like to be treated? Kant's version was more formal, act only according to that maxim which you can will to become a universal law. I think about that for a moment. Every action you take, ask yourself, could I want everyone in the world to do this? If not, then don't do it. Imagine how radically different our world would be if people actually lived by this principle. Now that's deep. But here's the thing, Kant's work didn't just stop with him. It sparked a whole movement. Enter German idealism. People like Johann Gottlieb Fichte and Friedrich Schelling took Kant's ideas and ran with them. They weren't satisfied with the idea that we could never know reality in itself. Instead, they proposed that our minds don't just organize reality, they create it. So, take this question with you. What if your mind is actively shaping the reality you experience every day? In the next stage of our journey, we arrive at Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. And let me tell you, Hegel was not an easy guy to read. But his ideas are worth the effort. What's most fascinating about Hegel is his dialectical method, this idea that history and reality progress through contradictions. So how does this work? Well, Hegel believed that for every idea, which he called a thesis, there's an opposing idea, an antithesis. And the clash of these ideas creates something new, a synthesis. Think of it like this. Society doesn't just evolve in a straight line. It evolves through conflict and resolution. Each stage of human history represents a struggle between opposing forces, and the resolution of that struggle leads to progress. Take a moment to think about this. What conflicts in your own life are creating the conditions for growth? What oppositions are shaping the person you're becoming? Hegel's philosophy wasn't just about history or abstract concepts. He was also deeply concerned with freedom and self-consciousness. He believed that true freedom comes through recognizing and reconciling with contradictions within yourself and in the world. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Hegel believed that this dialectical process wasn't just happening in history or society, it was happening in our consciousness. Have you ever had conflicting thoughts or emotions only to resolve them and feel like you've grown as a person? That's Hegel's dialectic at work in your own mind. Now imagine applying this to society. Hegel's ideas laid the groundwork for understanding how freedom evolves through social structures, but it also explains why conflict both within us and in the world is necessary for progress. This perspective directly influenced thinkers who came after him, particularly Karl Marx. But before we get to Marx, we need to explore another critical part of German philosophy, the Frankfurt School, and their critical theory. This group of 20th century thinkers, including Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, and Herbert Marcuse, took Hegel's ideas and applied them to modern society. They ask why, after so much technological progress, do we still live in a world full of inequality, oppression, and authoritarianism? The Frankfurt School argued that enlightened ideals of reason and freedom had been co-opted by systems of power. They said that modern society, with all its technological advancements, had become more efficient at controlling people rather than liberating them. Here's the powerful insight: technology and reason can be used to control as much as they can be used to free. I think about that the next time you're scrolling through social media or using the latest gadget. Who benefits from this technology? Is it truly empowering you, or is it controlling you in ways you don't realize? As we delve deeper into the Frankfurt School's critiques of capitalism and mass media, ask yourself this: how much of your own life is shaped by forces beyond your control? And more importantly, what can you do about it? Keep watching, because up next we're going to explore one of the most revolutionary applications of philosophy, how Karl Marx took Hegel's dialectic and turned it into a tool for changing the world. Karl Marx took Hegel's dialectic and gave it a material twist. He asked, what if the true engine of history isn't just ideas, but material conditions? So what if the struggle that drives history isn't just between abstract forces, but between economic classes? Marx believed that all of human history could be understood as a struggle between those who have power and wealth, the ruling class, and those who are oppressed. For Marx, the synthesis of this struggle would be a revolution where the oppressed overthrow the ruling class and create a classless society. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like a pretty radical idea. But before we dismiss it, let's consider what Marx was really saying. He wasn't just talking about political revolutions, he was talking about a complete transformation in how we understand freedom, work, and community. Marx argued that capitalism alienates us from our true selves. We become cogs in a machine, working for the benefit of others, rather than finding fulfillment in what we create. And think about it, how many of us feel disconnected from the work we do every day? How many of us feel like we're just going through the motions without any real sense of purpose? Marx believed that this alienation wasn't just a personal problem, it was a social problem rooted in the economic system. And his solution? A revolution that would create a society where people are free to develop their full potential. But here's the kicker: Marx wasn't just interested in economics. He believed that philosophy had a role to play in changing the world. Remember Hegel's dialectic. For Marx, the real contradiction in society was between the productive forces, the workers, and the relations of production, the owners. And just like Hegel's synthesis, Marx believed this contradiction would resolve in a new, more just society. So here's the deep question I want to leave you with. How do the contradictions in your own life between your work, your relationships, your values point toward a larger truth? What is the synthesis that you're moving toward? We left off with Karl Marx, who took Hegel's dialectic and turned it into a philosophy of revolution. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Marx wasn't working in a vacuum. His ideas, radical as they were part of a much larger conversation happening in German philosophy at the time. And this conversation is where Friedrich Nietzsche comes into play. Now, Nietzsche is one of the most misunderstood philosophers out there. You might have heard quotes like "God is dead" and thought, wow, this guy sounds pretty extreme. And he was. But Nietzsche's philosophy goes far beyond shock value. In fact, what Nietzsche offers us is one of the most profound critiques of society, and more importantly, a path toward personal freedom that's just as relevant today as it was over 100 years ago. So let's dive in. Nietzsche's philosophy begins with a critique of morality. He believed that traditional moral values, what we often take for granted as good and evil, weren't based on any objective truth. Instead, they were constructs created by society to control individuals. According to Nietzsche, morality was often a tool of the weak to suppress the strong, a way for society to tame human instincts and creativity. Think about that for a second. How many of your own values, your ideas of right and wrong, are truly yours? How much of what you believe is simply inherited from society, from your culture, from your upbringing? Nietzsche wanted us to question these inherited values. He wanted us to ask, are these values serving me, or are they holding me back? And this is where Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, or Overman, comes in. The Übermensch is someone who breaks free from the shackles of traditional morality and creates their own values. Nietzsche wasn't saying we should abandon all ethics. He was saying we need to be the authors of our own lives. The Übermensch isn't someone who lives recklessly or without conscience, quite the opposite. They are deeply thoughtful, but they live according to their own standards, not the standards imposed by society. Here's the practical takeaway. Nietzsche is challenging you to be more than just a product of your environment. He's asking you to become the author of your own life story. What values do you live by? Have you ever questioned where they come from? And more importantly, have you ever considered what it would look like to create your own? Now, let's apply this to your everyday life. We live in a world full of rules, expectations, and norms that shape everything from how we work to how we interact with others. But Nietzsche's message is that true freedom comes when you start questioning these rules, when you stop living for others and start living for yourself. And that brings us to one of Nietzsche's most powerful ideas, the eternal recurrence. Imagine if you had to live your life over and over again, endlessly repeating every single moment, every decision, every action. Nietzsche used this thought experiment to ask, how would you live if you knew every moment was going to recur forever? Would you be satisfied with your life, or would you want to change something? This idea forces us to confront the truth about our own existence. Are we living authentically, or are we just going through the motions? Nietzsche believed that if we could say yes to life, if we could embrace every moment, even the painful ones, then we would have achieved a kind of ultimate freedom. So here's the deep question: what would it take for you to say yes to your life, exactly as it is right now? What changes would you need to make? And what values would you need to embrace to live a life you could live over and over again without regret? Now let's move forward in the timeline. After Nietzsche, the world and German philosophy was never the same. The 20th century brought unprecedented changes. 2 world wars, the rise of fascism, and the growing power of technology reshaped how we thought about human nature, freedom, and society. And this is where we meet one of the most influential groups in modern philosophy, the Frankfurt School. These thinkers took the tools of philosophy and applied them to the social and political crises of their time. But what they discovered was that reason itself, the very thing the Enlightenment celebrated, could be a tool of oppression. One of the Frankfurt School's most famous works is The Dialectic of Enlightenment by Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer. In it, they argued that the same reason that liberated people during the Enlightenment had, in the modern world, been twisted into a tool of domination. In other words, the technologies and systems we created to make life better were now being used to control us. Let's bring this idea down to earth. Think about modern technology, the internet, smartphones, social media. These tools were supposed to connect us, to make information free and accessible to everyone. But what do we see instead? People glued to their screens, manipulated by algorithms, and constantly bombarded with information designed to keep them distracted and compliant. The Frankfurt School warned us that this could happen. They saw how mass media and technology could be used not to liberate, but to control. And they believed that true freedom could only come through a critical consciousness, the ability to step back, question the systems around us, and refuse to be manipulated. Here's a practical question for you. How much of your daily life is shaped by forces outside your control? How often do you find yourself reacting to your environment instead of shaping it? And what would it take to regain that control? The Frankfurt School wasn't just about critique, though. They also believed in action. They believed that philosophy could and should be used to change the world. And that's the message I want to leave you with today. We've covered a lot of ground, from Kant's critique of reason to Hegel's dialectic, to Marx's revolutionary philosophy, to Nietzsche's call for personal transformation, and finally, to the Frankfurt School's critique of modern society. But the thread that connects all of these thinkers is this: philosophy isn't just about thinking, it's about action. Each of these philosophers asked the deep questions about life, freedom, and society, but they didn't stop there. They used philosophy as a tool to challenge the status quo, to push boundaries, and to inspire change. And now, it's your turn. What will you do with these ideas? How will you use them to question your own assumptions, challenge the systems that shape your life, and create a world and a life that's truly free? And with that, our journey through the great timeline of the German School of Philosophy comes to an end. But this isn't really the end, it's just the beginning. The beginning of a new way of thinking, a new way of living, and maybe even a new way of being. And don't forget, the German School of Philosophy isn't just about ideas, it's about action. It's about changing how you see the world and changing the world itself.